Monday morning we had.
I'm Bill Hemmer. Good morning. The president calling it a matter of national security. Officials suggesting a criminal matter may be in order to determine the identity of the anonymous writer. White House counselor Kellyanne Conway said this about that a bit earlier today. Check it out.
I have no idea. I think the person probably wasn't banking on the fact that he or she would be so ridiculed, if not excoriated, right, left, and center at this point, because you even see Democratic members of Congress, left-wing liberals out there saying, hey, this is no way to express your opinion. Come forward, put your authorship on it.
Chief White House correspondent John Roberts picks up the story at North Lawn right there. Monday beginning for a whole new week. Hey, John, good morning.
The first of 5 Mondays, Bill, before next weekend. You know, the White House might have some idea of who they think might have written that anonymous op-ed, but sources here tell me they haven't really zeroed in on anyone. But top officials, including the vice president, continuing to bang the drum that if the author of that op-ed does not agree with what the president is doing, instead of some clandestine attempt to save the country from President Trump, they should just pack up and leave. Listen to what he said yesterday.
Do you think you know who Anonymous is?
I don't know, but I do know that they should resign.
Should all top officials take a lie detector test, and would you agree to take one?
I would agree to take it in a heartbeat.
Treason?
It's un-American, and I think that's why you've seen Republicans and Democrats condemn this. The American people vote for a president. They fully expect the president to be able to surround themselves with men and women who will work with them in advancing their agenda.
The president called last week for the Attorney General Jeff Sessions to launch an investigation into who the author is and suggested the New York Times could have some exposure for publishing it. That brought a terse response from the New York Times as we went into the weekend. New York Times editor Eileen Murphy saying, quote, "We're confident that the Department of Justice understands that the First Amendment protects all American citizens and that it would not participate in such a blatant abuse of government power." The president also going after the Woodward book again this morning. You had one tweet at the top. Here's another. "It is mostly anonymous sources here. Why should anyone trust you?" General Mattis, General Kelly said it's not true. The president was on the Today Show this morning. The president responding to Savannah Guthrie in the Today Show saying Bob Woodward is a liar who is like a Dem operative prior to the midterms. He was caught cold even by NBC. As he makes the rounds at a TV book tour, though, Woodward is standing by what he wrote and dismissing administration denials. Listen here.
They are not telling the truth.
That's fine.
No, but look, what's going on here, and my old boss at the Washington Post, Ben Bradley, the great editor, used to say the truth emerges. Sometimes it takes time. These people, these are political statements to protect their jobs, totally understandable.
Despite the terse back and forth, though, Woodward did find some common ground with the president over that anonymous New York Times op-ed. Woodward saying over the weekend that that op-ed was, quote, too vague and, quote, does not meet the standards to be published. Bill?
John, thanks. John Roberts leading our coverage this hour from the North Lawn. Thank you, sir. Sandra?
For more on all this, let's bring in Bret Hume, Fox News senior political analyst. Bret, it's always tough to decide where to begin. Let's start first with Bob Woodward. The book out tomorrow. He's standing by what he wrote. What do you think about the fact that we're still talking about Anonymous this morning and Bob Woodward?
Well, let me just say, Sandra, I've known Bob Woodward for probably 45 years, and he in this book is doing what he does and has done for decades now, very successfully in the sense of the sales of his books. He goes and he talks to people by the metric ton, and he promises them all anonymity, and they tell him things. And he then writes books based on what they tell him. However, the books are not really annotated or footnoted, and they don't give you, never have, any way to determine the credibility of his sources. So everything ends up hanging on him and his judgment and his choice of sources and so forth. Now, he's a solid guy. He's a serious guy. He's a good reporter. There's no doubt about any of that. However, his work has to stand on its own because we don't know where the stuff came from, and we don't have any context for it, and we don't. And this has been a criticism of his work since back in the 70s. I was assigned to do a magazine profile about him back then, and at the time, journalists in Washington who were by no means sympathetic to the administration in power were being critical of Bob Woodward's methods for the same reason we're hearing now. So this goes back a long way. There's nothing really new about it in terms of what he's done, and it has to hang on his credibility. But the problem is, of course, it can never really be proven, one way or the other, really.
Well, that seems to be what bothers the president the most about all this, and he's making his thoughts on it very clear in a new tweet this morning, writing, quote, "The Woodward book is a joke, just another assault against me in a barrage of assaults using now disproven, unnamed, and anonymous sources. Many have already come forward to say the quotes by them, like the book, are fiction. Dems can't stand losing. I'll write the real book," says the president this morning. That is the latest from the White House on that.
Well, that's Sandra, I got to say, I mean, the sources have not been disproven. They haven't been proven either. And in all likelihood, they never will be. And so that's where we are. And, of course, you know, the association of him with the Dems, I don't know Bob Woodward, I don't know what his politics are, but he's never been particularly politically active. I don't think this is a product of the Democrats. It's a product of one guy, independent, done well, but he doesn't name his sources, so it's hard to evaluate his work.
Interesting. And as far as Anonymous is concerned, the hunt is still on. The White House, John Roberts reporting, they think they've narrowed things, but they're not really circling in on any one person. They still don't know, and the New York Times appears to be standing by their decision to publish it.
Well, we keep hearing, Sandra, that we will know, and maybe even soon, the identity of the anonymous writer. I have my doubts. The New York Times isn't going to identify the person. I doubt very seriously that the Times has reporters working to do so. I don't pick up any vibe around Washington that there are a lot of reporters trying to dig this out. What you have is one of these leak hunts, which every now and then turn up somebody, but mostly don't. And that's what the Trump administration is up to. So the interesting question for me is, how really senior is this person? And the thing that's notable about his anonymous op-ed is that he never really cites a policy result or a decision result from the president's chaotic goings-on that he can point to as dangerous. The theme of it seems to be we around him are restraining him. That's probably not a bad thing.
Interesting. Well, we know what the White House has to say. We heard from the president. Sarah Sanders says the person should resign. Kellyanne Conway says this person intended to create chaos inside of the White House. And we heard from the vice president over the weekend, willing to take a lie detector test. We'll see where this all goes, but it is just Monday morning, and it was nice to start with you, Britt. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandra.